On a warm summer night in 1975 in the peaceful town of North Webster, Indiana, 17-year-old Laurel Jean Mitchell vanished without a trace after she left work. The next day, her lifeless body was found floating in a nearby river. Who could have committed such a horrific act? For nearly 5 decades, her murder remained unsolved and left her family devastated and the community haunted. But in 2023, a breakthrough finally shed light on the dark mystery of the untimely death of Laurel. What happened to Laurel that fateful night, and who was responsible? The answers may shock you. Let's get into it. You know those towns where everyone knows your name and life just feels a little more relaxed? In a nutshell, that's North Webster, Indiana. This small town in Kosciuszko County is where neighbors become family and are surrounded by peaceful lakes and picturesque views. Life moves at an easy pace because families are enjoying the outdoors and friends are stopping to chat. The charm of North Webster extends beyond its lake views. The town proudly supports its Whitco Wildcats sports teams with Friday night lights that unite the community. While Indiana is famous for its basketball heritage, the passion of North Webster for hoops is unmatched. Who knows, the next Larry Bird or Gordon Hayward will emerge from this hoops-loving town. But beneath a charming surface, you'll find a more complex story. This tight-knit town has faced its share of heartbreak and tragedy. Crimes have left deep scars and tested the strength of the community. One devastating example is the murder of Laurel Jean Mitchell. Her life was brutally cut short, leaving family, friends, and neighbors reeling. Born on May 24, 1958, to Richard and Wilma, Laurel was the second child in a loving family. Her older brother Bruce was off serving in the Army in California, while her younger sister Sarah was just 5 years behind. Laurel grew up enveloped in the warmth of a loving family, where laughter and togetherness filled every corner of their home. Laurel Jean Mitchell grew up with her siblings and shared laughter and tears. They made lifelong memories through family traditions and adventures. The extraordinary gift that Laurel had was her ability to connect with others genuinely. Her effortless charm and warm demeanor drew people to her and made her a beloved figure in the neighborhood. Music and dance were the passions of Laurel Jean Mitchell. With a beautiful voice, she sang in her church chorus, and as a dedicated dance student, she perfected her moves at a local studio. For Laurel, music and dance were more than hobbies. They were her expression, her joy, and her celebration of life. As she approached her senior year at Wawasee High School, the future looked incredibly bright for her. She had dreams that seemed to stretch endlessly and filled with adventure and possibilities. To make her summer even more exciting, she took a job at the Cokesbury Inn, which was a charming restaurant right on the shores of Webster Lake. It was the perfect gig for a teenager, and Laurel loved her work. She also made great friends among her co-workers and brought smiles to the faces of customers who appreciated her cheerful attitude. That August day began like any other for the Mitchell family. Laurel, her younger sister Sarah, and a friend who was staying with them woke up early and were ready to tackle their morning chores. The air filled with the familiar sounds of breakfast cooking and laughter echoing through the kitchen as they rushed to finish their tasks. Richard and Wilma prepared to head off to work, but were completely unaware that the day was about to turn into an unimaginable tragedy. By mid-afternoon, Laurel set off for her shift at the Cokesbury Inn with her spirits high and her smile bright. She felt excited about her job, where she enjoyed serving customers and chatting with her co-workers. As she moved around the restaurant, she brought warmth to the busy atmosphere and exchanged jokes and laughter with the regulars. The evening shift began, and Laurel fell into its steady pace. She was unaware of the horror that would soon to arrive. Laurel had plans to meet up with friends after her shift at Adventureland, which was a local amusement park just half a mile from her workplace. When a co-worker offered her a ride home after the restaurant closed, she politely declined, and her heart set on the fun night ahead. At 10:15 p.m., Laurel clocked out, said goodbye, and entered the warm summer night. The streets were alive with the sounds of summer. Laurel walked into darkness and was unaware it would be her last moment alive. It was the last time someone saw her. Back at home, parents of Laurel assumed she was out enjoying time with friends. They had no reason to worry and believed she was at the amusement park as planned. Meanwhile, her friends thought she had gone home after work. It was an average expectation from her family and friends for a responsible girl like Laurel. However, without the knowledge of everyone, the group changed their plans and opted to go to the county fair in Warsaw instead of the amusement park. This miscommunication would weigh heavily on their minds in the days to come. As the night was becoming dark, their fear was increasing. When a friend of Laurel returned to the Mitchell home around midnight, her heart raced as she realized that Laurel hadn't made it home. Laurel was always responsible, and she would never stay out past curfew without letting them know. Their hearts began to race as panic started to set in. Despite their growing anxiety, the Mitchells decided to wait a little longer and hoped that Laurel would walk through the door any minute. They chatted nervously and tried to distract themselves from the sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong. However, as the clock ticked and the minutes turned into hours, their fear transformed into a deep-seated dread. The once warm and welcoming home felt heavy with uncertainty, and shadows seemed to appear more significant in the corners of their minds. Finally, at around 4 a.m., they decided to call the police to report Laurel missing with a collective sense of alarm. News of the disappearance of Laurel had spread quickly throughout the tight-knit community and sent ripples of concern through every household. Neighbors, friends, and strangers united to search for Laurel in combed woods and roadsides, and their voices filled the quiet streets. They had brought flashlights, ropes, and determination, and hoped against hope to find any trace of Laurel. The police had taken the report seriously and dispatched officers to canvass the area, but as the hours dragged on, there was no sign of Laurel. Hope had begun to fade and was replaced by a growing sense of dread. Back at home, Sarah had woken up to find her parents in a state of distress, and their faces were etched with worry. The usual morning routine had been disrupted, and the air had been thick with an unspoken fear. Though Sarah had been supposed to attend a softball practice that morning, she had sensed that something was terribly wrong. Her parents had urged her to go anyway and hoped to shield her from the escalating panic that had taken over the house. "Just try to focus on your game," her mother had said, and forced a smile that did little to hide her own anxiety. With a heavy heart, Sarah had left for practice, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her sister wasn't coming home. The distressing thought bothered her as she hiked through the familiar path to the field. Glenn Dixon and his son Hager began fishing on the Elkhart River at 10:30 a.m. Their fishing spot was 15 miles from the workplace of Laurel. They were hoping for a peaceful morning, but instead of a quiet day by the water, they made a horrifying discovery when they saw a fully clothed body floating in the river. The sight had stopped them in their tracks, and it hadn't taken long for them to realize they weren't looking at an accident. The body had been in the water for some time, and it had become clear this was no accident. They immediately called the police. The police arrived quickly and responded to the desperate call from Glenn and Hager. Soon, the once peaceful riverbank had been crowded with officers, and their radios were crackling with urgent communication. They had retrieved the body with a mix of professionalism and somber respect, and knowing they were about to deliver devastating news to a family. As they worked quickly to identify the victim, there was a palpable tension and unspoken fear hung in the air. It was Laurel Mitchell who was missing. This news hit like a punch to the gut. The bright, bubbly girl with a passion for music and dance had been gone, and her life abruptly ended. For the Mitchell family, the news was highly devastating. When officers arrived to deliver the tragic message, Richard broke down in tears, unable to grasp that his beloved daughter was gone. Wilma was inconsolable, and her grief was so profound that it seemed to engulf her completely. The family, which was known for their tight bonds and shared laughter, suddenly felt fractured and lost. When Sarah returned from practice and saw the police cars parked outside their home, there was a wave of dread washed over her. She instinctively knew something was terribly wrong. As she stepped through the door, her heart raced, and each beat was resonating with the fear that was growing inside her. Their world had been irrevocably shattered, and the reality of their loss began to sink in. Days after the horrifying discovery of the body of Laurel, the autopsy report arrived and brought a chilling sense of finality. Laurel had drowned, but the report also noted bruises on her hands and shoulders and showed signs that she had fought back against her attacker. The most horrifying revelation was the confirmation of sexual assault. Conversations turned urgent and heated as questions arose about how this could happen in their quiet town. Who would commit such a heinous act against someone as kind and innocent as Laurel? For years, the case remained unsolved and weighed heavily on the hearts of the people. Despite diligent efforts from the police, the investigation delayed and left the community in a state of frustration and despair. People hoped for answers and justice for Laurel. But then in 2023, nearly 48 years later, everything changed. The arrest of two elderly men who were teenagers at the time of the incident and had lived in the same area sent shockwaves through the community. This moment reignited hope and brought a mix of sorrow and relief and marked a crucial step toward healing. How did this happen? It's hard to believe that a breakthrough would finally come after all these years. The small community of North Webster, which was typically accustomed to quiet and peaceful days, was suddenly thrust into chaos. One witness, Frank Overmeyer, had recalled that he heard the trunk of a car slam shut around the time Laurel went missing. But at that moment, he thought the car resembled an Oldsmobile. It didn't seem like a critical piece of information, and it was just a past thought that he didn't think would matter later. As investigators worked diligently, they collected all the belongings of Laurel, which were her clothes, a silver necklace, one earring, shoes, and her favorite sweatshirt. Among these items, her blue jeans were found unzipped and unbuttoned, which only deepened the mystery surrounding her death. However, the technology available at the time was severely limited, and no one knew what could be done with the evidence. The funeral of Laurel was a sad occasion that no one in town would soon forget. The large church in town was packed with friends, neighbors, and classmates, and all were mourning the tragic loss of a young girl taken too soon. Sarah sat between her father and her older brother Bruce, and both of them grabbed her hands tightly. She didn't remember much about the service itself and only the overwhelming pain that consumed her. The reality hit her like a wave, and her sister, her confidant, was gone. Nothing in the world seemed to make sense anymore. The case went cold despite the efforts of the community and the hard work of detectives. Weeks turned into months and months into years, but no answers came. It was as if the killer of Laurel had simply vanished into thin air and left behind an unforgettable mystery. Richard and Wilma Mitchell, her devoted parents, were insistent in their chase of justice. They kept the case alive in the public eye and hoped that one day someone would come forward with the truth. Unfortunately, their health began to decline, and in 2012 both of them passed away within just 4 months of each other. Tragically, they never learned who took the life of their daughter. For years, the case sat on a shelf, collected dust, and faded from memory. However, in 2007, Indiana State Police Captain Kevin Smith was assigned to lead the investigation. He was determined to bring justice to the family of Laurel. He dove headfirst into the cold case and accurately reviewed all the evidence and interviews. Yet, like his predecessors, he found no new leads. It wasn't until 2013 that the case received a much-needed bombshell when a woman named Renee Sexton came forward. She recounted an alarming conversation she had had with a man named John Lehman back in 1975. Lehman had confessed to being involved in a murder with his friend, whose name was Fred Bandy. Although he didn't provide any details at the time, the revelation of Renee reignited hope in the investigation. This new lead breathed fresh life into a case that had seemed hopeless, and the community began to dare to hope once more that justice might finally be within reach. Moreover, a year later, another significant tip came in from a man named Bill McDonald. He recalled attending a party in 1975 where Fred Bandy had confessed to committing a crime near the river, where the body of Laurel had ultimately been discovered. The more detectives investigated the background of Fred Bandy, the more suspicious he appeared. Little did they know Bandy had a troubling criminal record, and in 2001 he had been convicted to abuse a minor, which raised further red flags. Although this information wasn't conclusive evidence of his involvement in the case of Laurel, it was enough to help detectives dig deeper into his past and connections. Again, on July 3, 2014, an individual reported that Bandy had claimed he committed the crime that took place at Mallard's Roost, which is a public access site adjacent to the location where the body of Mitchell was found. On September 25, 2019, Noble County Department of Sheriff received a report that year ago at a high school party, Bandy said he and Lehman committed the murder of Mitchell together. Then, in 2019, Captain Smith decided to re-examine the evidence from Laurel's case with a fresh perspective. Until then, modern forensic technology had arrived, and he submitted clothing of Laurel for DNA testing. Smith was hopeful that the advances in science could finally provide the answers they had been seeking for decades, and weeks passed as forensic scientists closely analyzed the clothing. Finally, their persistence paid off, and a male DNA profile was discovered on the fabric. This breakthrough gave life to the investigation, which allowed detectives to rule out several potential suspects. The detectives focused their attention squarely on two men who were Fred Bandy and John Lehman. Detectives now had a more precise direction in the investigation, but they needed more concrete evidence. On December 5, 2022, they visited the house of Fred Bandy to collect a DNA sample. Bandy was 67 years old, and he was surprisingly cooperative and provided the sample without any hesitation. Clearly, he was unaware of the gravity of the situation. Authorities received results on January 13, 2023. A certificate of analysis revealed that Bandy was 13 billion times more likely to be the contributor of the DNA found in clothing of Mitchell than any other unknown person. The detectives hadn't yet questioned John Lehman, and they knew that this step was crucial before moving forward with the arrest of Fred. With strong DNA evidence linking Fred to the crime, they understood the urgency but also recognized the need to gather more information. Both men had to be held accountable for the horrific act they had committed. As the investigation progressed, detectives exposed that Fred had owned an Oldsmobile in 1975. This detail interestingly connected back to witness testimony from Frank Overmeyer, who had reported that he heard that someone had shut the truck forcefully on the night Laurel went missing. On February 6, 2023, Fred Bandy and John Lehman were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. For the family of Laurel, the news was both a mixture of sadness and happiness. Sarah and Bruce felt a sense of relief that justice was finally within reach, but the absence of their parents during this moment weighed heavily on their hearts. When Captain Smith called Sarah to share the news, she experienced a swirl of emotions. In court, both men pleaded not guilty, but the evidence against them was undeniable. DNA matches, witness testimonies, and the detectives' thorough investigation painted an ugly picture of what likely happened on that tragic night in August 1975. Detectives believed Fred and John had abducted Laurel, assaulted her, and then driven her to the river, where they drowned her. The alarming details of the crime sent shakes through the courtroom. As Fred and John awaited their trial, a family of Laurel braced themselves for the long journey ahead. Justice was coming, but it wouldn't bring Laurel back.
I just always wondered, like, how she would have turned out. And she got, she missed prom, she missed graduation, she missed getting married and having kids. And I didn't have anybody to share all that with, anybody to get, information, help me grow up.
For Sarah, the pain of losing her sister would never fully fade. After decades of waiting for answers, the reality of it all felt almost odd now that justice was within reach. Bandy and Lehman were cautiously scheduled to have their first hearing on Wednesday, February 8, 2023, in the Noble Circuit Court. A 5-day jury trial is officially scheduled for Fred Bandy, Jr., who is 68 years old now. He is charged with first-degree murder. A final pretrial conference for Bandy was also scheduled for July 29, 2024, at 3 p.m., which again has no results. He again had a pretrial conference in Noble County on February 5, 2024, where the trial dates were set for October 7th to 11th, 2024. His co-defendant, John W. Lehman, also 68 years old, has his own legal proceedings. He also had a pretrial conference on February 26, 2024 at 1 p.m. Additionally, a change of plea hearing was set for June 18th at 11:30 a.m. in Noble Circuit Court. At this hearing, Lehman was expected to withdraw his not guilty plea and plead guilty to the charges against him. On August 15, 2024, Lehman recently accepted a plea deal that could significantly reduce his sentence. Under the agreement, a first-degree murder charge would be dropped to conspiracy to commit murder, and he would face 8 years in an Indiana state prison. However, this deal depends upon the approval of a judge, which is scheduled to be determined at a hearing on October 11th. This development marks a crucial turning point in the case, potentially bringing closure to the families affected. The outcome of the hearing will be closely watched, as it will determine whether the plea of Lehman deal is accepted or if the original charges will stand. Bandy is still scheduled to go on trial in October. The life of Laurel Mitchell was heartbreakingly cut short and left an unfillable void. However, thanks to Captain Smith and the firm dedication of his team, her culprits will not be set free. Their tireless efforts have ensured justice is served and bring closure to a community. The legacy of Laurel extends far beyond her tragic fate. She will be remembered as a symbol of resilience, hope, and an inspiring soul.